Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and today we are talking about Metroid Prime 4 and how this game may be bringing some very significant changes to the series in order to help it be a big seller. Why would they be going in this direction, and what kind of changes would this direction see? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Before going forward though, we are currently aiming to reach for a goal of 40,000 subscribers, so if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and enjoy the ride as we attempt to discuss Nintendo every day. So Metroid Prime 4 was initially announced June 2017 at E3. Then, January 2019, Nintendo announced the restart of this game. They moved over development to Retro Studios. And when they announced this restart, it was done in a dedicated video, very similar to how Nintendo has announced the delays for the major Zelda games. And during this video, they talked about wanting Metroid Prime 4 to measure up to the quality of the original Metroid Prime. And the original Metroid Prime is one of the highest reviewed games in history. So they suggested some pretty incredible things when they made that announcement. But here we are. It's early on into 2024, the middle of February 2024 when I'm recording this video, and we've yet to see anything yet. However, we have seen Retro Studios continually make a lot of big AAA Western development hires. And so, with this long development time, with these aspirations of quality, with the kind of talent they're bringing in, and also them having to have restarted the project, you gotta think that this game has quite the budget. This has not been a cheap game for Nintendo to make. These employees that have been working on this game since 2019, they need to have been paid all this time. And then what about the people beforehand when they initially announced the project? They needed to have been paid too, I'm sure, to some extent. So, this game is probably costing Nintendo a lot. And so you gotta think Nintendo will want to make a profit on this. Typically, Nintendo does make profits on their games. They're not like Sony and Microsoft that need to outsource and put out a lot of their games on other platforms to start improving some of their profit margins. So, point is, with Metroid Prime 4, I think it's pretty reasonable to think that Nintendo's gonna aim a bit high for this one. But the problem with Metroid is that they don't sell extremely well, these games. They don't sell terribly, but they're no Mario or Zelda or Splatoon or Animal Crossing. The idea of Metroid Prime 4 selling 5 million or higher sounds crazy to most people. I don't think it's crazy, but I'm also operating under the assumption that they are going to make some changes that will help this game reach a larger audience. And if you look at how Nintendo has treated a lot of their games, they have been making changes and doing things that have helped their different game series reach a larger audience. Look at Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. The formula they have now with the open air and the variety of things you can do in any order you choose, that freedom has really helped Zelda reach a much larger audience. Or even something smaller scale like Pikmin 4. Pulling the camera down and behind the characters so it looks more like a traditional third-person action-adventure game, and also introducing Ochi and all of its dynamics, were meant to make the game more approachable for a larger audience. And Pikmin 4 is the best-selling game in the series now, and going strong. So Nintendo has already seen some success by introducing some significant changes to some of their big series. But I think it's important to look at the examples of Breath of the Wild and Pikmin 4, because I think when we talk about this idea of Metroid changing, that scares a lot of Metroid fans. But I would say Breath of the Wild and Pikmin 4 are pretty amazing games, Tears of the Kingdom as well. Now, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, not every Zelda fan is a fan of those games, but many are. And so I'm sure there will be some people watching that will argue that no, they need to keep Metroid Prime as it is. But the problem with that is that I don't think Metroid Prime has aged really well. I love Metroid Prime, and I think Metroid Prime Remastered, the reviews it got, it deserves. And I think most people who play Metroid Prime will acknowledge objectively that it's a high quality experience. However, there's also many people that, while they may agree with that, are going to also say it's a high quality experience that is not for them. And I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of different friends and creators about this topic, and there's certain elements that come up that seem to make the games less inviting for them. Some of that is difficulty, some of that is it being in first person, and some of that is the aesthetic. It's not the typical style we see from Nintendo. And I'll even argue that the gameplay is very different from a lot of other Nintendo games as well. And I think this has something to do with why Metroid doesn't sell well. Metroid does not perform well in Japan. It hasn't reached a significant part of that audience. And so what can Nintendo do with the Metroid Prime formula to adapt and evolve it for the modern era and also make it something even bigger and better that reaches a larger audience while still maintaining that Metroid essence, that Metroid Prime essence? Because, yeah, they could make another Fortnite, for example, but that wouldn't be Metroid Prime, would it? No. So, what can they do? Well, something that I kind of expect them to do is address how combat works. So, going back to prior Metroid Prime games, even then I kind of felt like it felt a little repetitive to just press the A button repeatedly to shoot a lot. And I really felt the discomfort of doing this, specifically with Metroid Prime 3, especially in Hyper Mode, against some of the harder bosses, like Moginar for example. It just becomes laborious after a certain point of just pressing the button all the time really quickly. And I'll say that with Metroid Prime Remastered, they did address this to some extent, because when you press the shooting button, there's a little bit of a rapid fire, so you aren't required to press the button really quickly the entire time to maintain a high rate of fire. And actually, not only can you shoot by pressing the A button, as you always have been with prior Metroid games, but also you can do so by pressing the trigger, like most typical shooting games of today. And I do think that makes a difference, it does help a little bit, but I think more needs to be done. The Metroid Prime Remaster was a remaster of the original game. They need to build a game with modern shooting mechanics in mind. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to basically give Samus a machine gun, but I do think they're going to rethink how you go about shooting and just combat in general. I do expect that they will use a shoulder button trigger so you can shoot your typical arm cannon weapons. But I also think the way Samus is going to be shooting from her arm cannon, the different beams, they're probably going to change them with this in mind. And this can get tricky because typically when you just press and hold the beam cannon weapon attack, you do a charge attack. And so how do you do a rapid fire but also have a charge attack at the same time? Well, maybe they introduce alternate firing options. A lot of shooters have more than one way to use your weapon, so they could do that. Or maybe they'll simply stick to that rapid fire option they introduced in Prime Remastered, where when you tap it, it does shoot a small little burst and you can continue to press it repeatedly to do that. And then when you still hold it, it still does a charge attack. However, they also think about how enemies receive that damage and they change things accordingly. But then going beyond that, how Samus moves around in the environment I think will change as well. Samus is supposed to be an agile character, and in the Metroid Prime games she feels very tanky. And then you look at a lot of modern first-person shooters today, like Call of Duty, Titanfall, Apex Legends, even Fortnite, even though it's third person. There's a lot of mechanics that we've seen introduced into a lot of different shooters where the characters move around more fluidly. They can do a running slide, they can do dashes, they can do melee or parry attacks while on the go, or even running upon walls. And I think mechanics like these make a lot of sense for Metroid. If you look at the 2D Metroid games, they do a much better job of depicting Samus as an agile character, especially the most recent Metroid Dread, where she can do a lot of the things I just mentioned, but in a 2D space. They need to think about how Samus can do this in a 3D space. Show her agility, make her more fluid, speed up gameplay. I think speeding up gameplay and making shooting feel less repetitive and more satisfying will go a long ways towards making the game feeling more inviting for a larger audience. Beyond that, some may argue that they should get rid of first person. I don't think so, because then it wouldn't really be Metroid Prime, but I do think there is something to the idea of playing around with the camera perspective more. Maybe they can introduce more moments where we see Samus in third person. Maybe you can pull behind the shoulder. Maybe that's at least made an option. Or maybe there are simply more interactions where this occurs. Perhaps as Samus has a melee counter in Prime 4, when you initiate this can start a grapple sequence where you can see things in third person, very much in the way it works in Metroid Other M. or some of the 2D Metroid games where you initiate the counter. This would be a great way to show Samus in a different light. Now, something else that a lot of people seem to want for Metroid Prime 4 is for the game to have a big open world to explore. I don't think the game needs to be literally open world where you have this giant, massive area that you can explore and do things however you want, however you please, without any needed, necessary order. But I do think it makes sense to still retain a lot of those smaller and narrow pathways we've seen in the Metroid series, mixed in with some large, expansive areas to explore. We believe Metroid Prime 4 is going to be a real looker for Nintendo, and it's going to be exciting to see an exotic alien world to explore. And Metroid games are adventure games, and so adventure is important, and having a big world to explore is going to be exciting. So I do think a better realization of a larger, beautiful alien world is going to bring in a lot of people. And the vastness of that will help. We've seen a lot of bigger, more open games perform better, like Breath of the Wild, like Kirby's Forgotten Land, like Mario Odyssey. Kirby and Mario aren't open world, but they are bigger and more vast than their prior entries. And so I do think that matters to an extent when it comes to these sorts of games, because it brings in more hype and excitement, for sure. But if we are to have some bigger, more vast areas, I think they're going to have to think about movement as well. How Samus moves about the world. Will she have the screw attack? Will she have her speed booster? How will they implement the morph ball? Will she have mounts? Will she be able to interact with alien life? Will there be like some sort of alien horse or creature she can ride? Will she use her gunship in any way? Might they introduce some sort of rail system that allows her to traverse areas more quickly? These are things that I'm sure they're keeping in mind as well. I don't know what they're actually going to do. I don't know what the overall gameplay loop for Metroid Prime 4 will be, but I do think it's interesting to think about how they may go about some of these changes. Before we close out though, there is another element I would like to discuss, and that is the possibility of multiplayer. We have seen Retro Studios hire a lot of talent that have a history of working on projects that also had online multiplayer. And what's interesting is that the Metroid series does have a history of multiplayer, specifically the Metroid Prime series. Metroid Prime 2 Echoes had a local multiplayer. They made Metroid Prime Hunters on Nintendo DS, where the main focus was an online multiplayer. It was basically a hero shooter for the time. And we even have Metroid Prime Federation Force, which was basically an online cooperative game. You could have done it locally as well if you had someone nearby. But the point is that it's another example of the Metroid Prime name having multiplayer attached to it. And so there is a history here of multiplayer. Not always. Metroid Prime 1 didn't have it, Metroid Prime 3 didn't have it. And so there is a debate to be had if multiplayer will be included in Prime 4. You don't want the multiplayer to take away from what could be a masterful single-player experience. We don't expect an online multiplayer mode for The Legend of Zelda. We don't expect an online multiplayer mode for 3D Mario. And so Metroid Prime is meant to be an adventure game. However, the Metroid games also historically aren't 100-hour experiences either. So I'm not expecting Metroid Prime 4 to be as long as Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. They're typically more replayable. You play through it once, and you're like, okay, that was pretty good. Let me go for a higher completion rate and also complete it faster at the same time. They're just more fun to kind of pick up, go through after a couple play sessions, and finish. So while I think Metroid Prime 4 is likely going to be the longest, biggest Metroid game to date, I'm not expecting necessarily a 100-200 hour single-player campaign. And with how much time they put into this game, with how many resources it seems like it's going into this game, I think there's an argument to be made that there could be multiplayer. And multiplayer games do tend to have longer legs with more updates, keeps people going and talking about it, so this could help sales. And if Metroid Prime 4 is going to be coming out early on for Switch 2, as a cross-gen title comes out for both systems, but they really push it for Switch 2, and they want to showcase the online features and hopefully bring in that audience that likes things like Call of Duty, for example, which, by the way, Microsoft is contractually obligated to be bringing over to Nintendo now, so that audience is probably going to be a big part of Switch 2 moving forward. Nintendo may want to get the ball rolling by having their own big online multiplayer shooter out and available, and Metroid Prime is very different from Splatoon. They're two very different things, so you can still have your third-person ink shooter while also having your more sci-fi first-person shooter. Like, they're pretty different. And there are different ways to handle multiplayer for Metroid. It doesn't have to be team deathmatch like it is in Metroid Prime 2 or Hunters. It can be kind of like Federation Force, where it's cooperative and there's different things that you can do. I think there's a lot of options there, but the notion of incorporating a significant online multiplayer segment to Prime 4, I think will also help sales. And it would also go hand in hand with this idea of reassessing how combat and overall movement work in the Metroid Prime games. So if they handle all these things, I think it will definitely help the games to be more inviting to a larger audience. But I also kind of think I'm still sort of scratching the surface here. And so I'm going to ask you all in the comments, what else can Retro Studios and Nintendo incorporate into Metroid Prime 4 that will help it reach a larger audience while still retaining the overall essence of what is a Metroid game? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andre's Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.